And then we'll go silent for a while. And just reorienting yourself to sense of contact on the earth, space your body is occupying, sounds around you, the sounds of this voice, things in the room you happen to be in, space in front of you and the space behind you. And just gradually returning to this meditation moment. And just imagine the sound of a bell. So last week we covered some pretty tough ground. We were talking about trauma and not just the usual trauma that often gets talked about, but trauma that's built into the program, into the system of being a human being. Existential trauma begins at birth and through primitive agonies that might be pre-verbal before the senses are even fully formed, before the sense of an autonomous ego, as Winnicott, the psychologist or psychoanalyst and pediatrician, a very influential figure in developmental psychology and child psychology, observed. And then we've got the other traumas on top of that. So as the reason that I always try to stress safety, and I meant to say last week that if there was anything that I said or will say that feels too much for you or threatening, or just take care of yourself. And if there's anything that comes up that you would like to follow up on, maybe towards the end when Dana's giving the kind of final announcement before we do the final close, I'll just put my email address in the chat. And feel free to send me a note anytime if something that I said starts to overwhelm you, or you're concerned about it, or don't agree with it, or that's fine. I'm open to that. So, and then as I closing last week, I said, so this week we take up something maybe a little more fun. And so we're going to look at death anxiety. So, and the reason for that is it's kind of how the core of how I see the development of the conditioned sense of self. As I said last week, we have all of these places that we've been hurt, sometimes not to anyone's fault. I mean, simply because of having a sensitive human body that feels pain. And a corresponding sensitive human heart that can record the emotional pain. So, in my experience, the other side of that is awareness of our own mortality is also one of the parts of the core of what we wrap our conditioned sense of self around, which leads Dr. Gabor Mate to say what we tend to call our personality is really a loose affiliation of our defense mechanisms. And that's kind of a funny statement, but you start to examine it, there's a lot to that. So there's one of my favorite sayings of the Buddha around death turns out to be sometimes listed as a fake Buddha quote because it doesn't appear in the Pali Canon. But it does, I believe it does appear in one of the Mahayana sutras. And the quote is, "Of all the footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Of all the meditations on death is supreme." Whatever the source of that, I think it's a good quote, and I think it's right on the money. Now, in the Pali Canon, the Buddha did say, mindfulness of death, when developed and pursued, is of great fruit and great benefit. It gains a footing in the deathless, has the deathless as its final end. Therefore, you should develop mindfulness of death. Once again, just as last week I talked about the Buddha saying, without complete letting go, I see no safety for sentient beings. We have another paradox here. Because who wants to be mindful of death? I mean, that's the last thing that most people want to be mindful of. And yet the Buddha is saying that gives most bang for your buck, to be a little crude about it. Because looking deeply into impermanence can be one of the doors, or at least the key that opens one of the doors to the deathless. Really understanding and opening up to the reality of permanence. There's also a statement in the Pali Canon, those who taste mindfulness immersed in the body taste the deathless. And people go, well, wait a minute. I practiced mindfulness immersed in the body for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and I haven't tasted the deathless yet. So the question is, why is that? So my humble suggestion is that much of the time, when we think we are practicing mindfulness immersed in the body, in actual fact, we're practicing mindfulness immersed in our concept of the body, in our mental pictures of the body, in our conditioned idea of what the body is and who and what I am. So although we may be kind of in touch with the body, once again, we're often swimming in a sea of papancha. of outflows of thought proliferation and not fully in touch with the direct embodied experience. Because the direct embodied experience is not conceptual. It can't be accessed through thought. Thought and words can point the way, but the experience is completely different. I wasn't on this particular retreat, but friends of mine were on a retreat with Joseph Goldstein. At some point, Joseph lifted his hand up his arm up in the air. And his arm is up in the air. He said, "There is no arm here. There is nothing here to call arm. Arm is a word representing a concept with countless associations and images and experiences, and all individual because it depends on what your experience of your arm has been. You have those associations with arm. So we're always pointing to something deeper than language and deeper than concepts. I'm not sure where I got this quote from, but it's one of Joseph Goldstein's quotes. In our everyday notion of the body, we might say, "I feel my leg," but there is no sensation called leg. Rather, what we feel are certain sensations like pressure, heaviness, and lightness, and then we create an image or a concept, leg. In meditation, we move from the concept of the body to the awareness of the body as a changing energy field. On this level, the sense of the body as being something solid and substantial disappears, which again calls for safety. We have this internalized go to not only mental picture, but embodied me sense that the body is solid, and the body has solidity for sure, but that's all that it is. Then we're never going to see the other aspects of embodiment and energy and being. We're always going to be stuck with that concept. It's that concept that then leads us to conclude that we can call the body I, me, and mine. But when we actually examine it, where is there an I? Where is there a me? What can I call mine? And here's a quote from Ajahn Sucitto about death and dying and suffering in general. We unconsciously assume that calamities won't occur, that our partner won't get run down by a truck, or that our child won't be struck by disease. And most incredible of all, something in us is shocked by death. We feel that sickness, death, betrayals, breakdowns, and failures are an outrageous deviation from the smooth flow of life. This is a big part of what the Buddha meant by ignorance. The heart's contraction to a level where the range of burst potential is difficult to accept. Eventually, there is so much hide protecting the heart that the innate joy of being alive becomes inaccessible. So all of our hide, all of our layers of defense, all of our layers of self-definition, personality view, habit patterns, all of that end up covering the potential of the heart's sensitivity and natural wisdom and responsiveness and empathic attunement to life. So again, there's the paradox and the irony. And again, the parallel to trauma. I used to teach a course in crisis and trauma in everyday life. I was an assistant professor after I retired from my day job of running cemeteries and crematoria for 40 some years. And I was an assistant professor at King's University in London, probably for about a decade, I guess. And I eventually developed a course, Crisis and Trauma in Everyday Life. And when I finally got the course kind of molded to what I really wanted to teach, and that's what I really wanted to teach, it happened to correspond to the publication of two books. One was Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, and the other was Mark Epstein's Trauma of Everyday Life. Those became our basic texts. And so yeah, I just lost my train of thought there. Oh, okay. So along with that, many years ago, trying to think of which came first. Yeah, I was doing some grief and trauma training, and one of the there weren't a lot of books that we had to read, but one that we had to read was Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death, published in 1973. Ernest Becker's now long deceased, but his book was really pivotal in a lot of sociology and psychology. And out of that book grew an entire field of study called terror management theory. And so when I first read The Denial of Death, so one of the basic tenets is that all fear, all human fear, can be ultimately traced to death anxiety, the fear of death. And at first you go, well, wait a minute, there are all kinds of fears other than the fear of death. But look at what fear is. Threat to self, threat to anything construed as I, me, or mine. So if we dig deep enough behind any fear, and what is shame? Isn't shame, I'd like to crawl in a hole and die? And people actually say that when they feel embarrassed or humiliated or, nervous. So ultimately, tracing fear back to death anxiety means that if we can face it directly, safely, as I said last week, touching the places that hurt, the places that scare, just this much, just this much, just this much, with empathy and compassion and safety and understanding, then eventually a lot of these things we can clear, if not entirely, at least sometimes the lion's share of it anyway. And so let me just, like last week, I asked a couple of questions. So just out of curiosity, I'll do a little poll again. Do any of you remember the first time that you realized your own mortality, that death wasn't just about the kitty that, or the goldfish, or the bug, or grandma or grandpa, it was you as well? Does anybody have that memory? And I see most people have their cameras off, so it's hard for me to take a poll. Can you raise your hands if you have such a memory? And there's no right or wrong about this. Quite a few seem to be so far. Now, some people don't have a specific memory, but that the idea, not the idea, the reality that we are going to die, somehow through osmosis or somehow it eventually seeps into the psyche. And at some point, the child knows, oh, I am going to die. Whether it comes as a big shock or gradually ends up in the same place. Now, to be fair, last week I asked everybody about their first memory in this life, whether it was a positive one or a negative one. And I went back and I listened because I wasn't sure whether I had shared mine, and I didn't. So turnaround is fair play. So I'll just let you know that my very first memory in this life was a near-death experience. And it was both. Usually, I would say it was terrifying. But that's only half the story, because it began with utter bliss, ended up being terrifying only because the ego concept arose. It was like, where am I? If that question hadn't arisen, well, I don't know where I would be, but let's just say the experience would have been different. So we'll leave it at that for now. And just back to, just came to me now why I mentioned the two books by Bessel van der Kolk and Mark Epstein, because so Bessel van der Kolk's book is about how the body remembers. The body remembers, even if we don't remember the hospitalization at age 2 or that night before we even had language or concept of self, where we screamed with an earache, the body remembers that. So one of the trauma clients in Body Keeps the Score said, I never realized before that I had to turn towards my trauma in order to heal it. And death anxiety is like that. It's, for most people, it's the last thing they want to turn towards. I mean, especially in our culture, which is why Ernest Becker wrote the book in the first place. We're still, it's so strange because we're saturated in images of death, movies of death, video games of death, and real death around us all the time. And yet, most people don't think they're going to die, or they don't really believe they're going to die. Or they say, well, I might die sometime. uh, I think Jack Kornfield's got a story in Path with Heart about that. I think he was talking about his own parents, that they had a vague notion that they might die someday. When I was diagnosed with metastatic cancer going on 6 years ago now, one of the first things I had to do was give up the grief support groups I ran. Not because I didn't want to support people who were bereaved, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to take some of the things that come up. Not the things that were overwhelming, but I wouldn't be able to keep my mouth shut, as you sometimes have to do in, therapeutic group situations. You just have to kind of nod and let things pass. One example, certainly won't name a name, but I was doing a grief group once, and we begin with introductions going around. We ended up with such a large group that even doing introductions every week became onerous, because that could take up half of the time. By the time we got done introductions and how was your week, it was almost time to call it an evening. Anyway, we're going around introducing. There was a new man there, and I said, welcome, what brings you here? And he said, my mother died. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. My condolences. And I said, is there anything you'd like to share about that? And he went into a kind of tirade, like, why did my mother was a God-fearing, why did God take my mother, and on like this. And I'm sitting there looking at him thinking, the guy's got to be my age. So with as much gentleness and compassion as I could, I just kind of leaned over and said, how old was your mother? 96. And I froze. I literally had to bite my tongue, because I wanted to say, how long do you think we're supposed to live? So I knew that once I was diagnosed, when I was first diagnosed, I didn't know if I had 3 months, 3 years, or what, because we didn't know whether the treatments were going to work or not. So I knew that if something like that came up in a grief group, I would not be able to remain silent. So I decided to drop them altogether. I stopped doing grief groups. Anyway. So back to Ernest Becker and death anxiety. I see we're almost at half an hour, and I'm only halfway through what I wanted to talk about here. So just let me cover a couple of things, and then we'll close it down and open it up for questions or comments. And if there are no questions or comments, then I can share another couple of quotes. But just to set this up, so the first quote, okay, let me start with the childhood one. So here Becker's talking about when a child first realizes fully that death means them too, really touches into their mortality. So one of the first things a child has to do when awakening to their own mortality is to learn to abandon ecstasy, to do without awe, to leave fear and trembling behind. Only then can the child act with a certain oblivious self-confidence when the child has naturalized his world. And we say the word naturalized, but we really mean unnaturalized, falsified, with the truth obscured, the despair of the human condition hidden, a despair that the child glimpses in their night terrors and daytime phobias and neuroses. Now, Becker's view and the view of terror management theory is that most neuroses and many psychoses have their root in death anxiety. I'll just leave that for your own consideration. And here's Becker talking about an adult who experiences like panic attacks, whether they're related to death anxiety or not. A panic attack feels much like death anxiety. So he says, when you are not even securely anchored in this body, it becomes a real problem. Terror becomes unabsorbable by anything neural, the nervous system, anything fleshy, the body, in the spot where you stand, mindfulness of the body. Your symbolic awareness floats at maximum intensity all by itself. So you might remember last week I mentioned the trauma psychologist, Harvey Schwartz, who said that in trauma, the mind flees its own subjectivity in order to evacuate its pain. This description by Becker is a perfect example of that. So the symbolic awareness, our image of ourselves, our I sense, the embodied me sense tries to move away from the body because it's too painful. The body's going to die. The body's going to die. So then the Buddha comes along and says, mindfulness of the body is a great fruit, great benefit. Right there, right in the place that you're afraid to go, is your freedom. Right there is where you can taste the deathless. But you need to feel safe. You need to be willing to fully wake up to the grace of presence of your own full embodiment, and to know the difference between the horse and rider, between materiality and what knows materiality. So since we're a little past our time, I'll stop it there and may come back to some of these things if there's no quotes, no conversation. So it's just all of this. I'm just recalling an image from a retreat with Ajahn Suchito. It's one retreat, he said, it's like you've got an old sweater and there's a loose thread. And you just start teasing the thread a bit. It starts to come undone. A few more threads come with it. A few more threads come after that. And then all of a sudden the whole sweater just comes undone, falls apart. It's like that. But it doesn't happen all in one big. I mean, even after experiences of opening or awakening or whatever label people want to put on it, unless you go right to being fully awakened being an arhat, there's all kinds of work still to be done. Otherwise, teachers wouldn't meditate. They just say, well, I'm done. Yeah, the Buddha can meditated right up until his last breath. And arahants continue to meditate. So there's always work to be done, as far as I can see. Um, Now, having said that, my chaplaincy project was entitled Mindful Engagement of Mortality and Identity, Transforming Death Anxiety, an owner's manual. So that is freely available. And maybe I'm happy to send that out to you.
I appreciate that.
I'll put my email in the chat towards the end. So there might be some stuff in there that might be helpful. Anybody else? Yes, Brian.
I'd like to ask you a bit about the deathless because
Mhm.
I don't fully understand it, and I'm wondering,
You and everybody else, go ahead. Yeah.
and I'm wondering if that is the reality that we're all in, and no matter if we see it or not, the deathless is what things are, or if we don't see it, then there is death. I'd love for you to explain it a bit more if you don't mind.
Yeah, you give me an easy one. So, so the Buddha said that no phenomena whatsoever should be construed as I, me, or mine. So the deathless is not a phenomenon. It lies outside space and time. It's not somewhere else, and yet this is where sometimes there's a divide between Mahayana and Theravada teachings, because some folks in Mahayana say, nirvana and samsara are one. Well, except when they're not. Um, and that kind of statement, I think, confuses place and function. So as long as the mind is identifying with phenomena, the mind is conditioned. But the Buddha said there is an unborn, uncreated, unconditioned, unformed. Were it not for the unborn, uncreated, unconditioned, unformed, there would be no escape from the world of the born, the created, the conditioned, and the formed. So it's here and now. In the Pali Canon, it says, the Dharma here and now, visible here and now, knowable here and now, discernible by the wise, worthy of investigation. There's also a lot of statements in the Pali Canon about the doors to the deathless are open. The gate to the deathless is open. So it's always available. Now, it's paradoxical. I was going to save this kind of for next week, but I was having a discussion with Ajahn Amaro about 10 years ago. And I was saying that, a lot of the teachings, the way they're written, the way they're translated, it sounds like a constant moving forward, grasping, attaining, 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 attaining. But in actual practice, it's more like softening, opening, letting go, stepping back, letting go, I don't need to identify with this, let go. Oh, I don't need that, let go, let go. So in actual practice, we back our way onto the shore of nirvana. And then at that point, we just abide there until the time and the karma is ripe, and we turn around and face the island. Because right now we're not facing the island beyond which we cannot go. We're not facing nirvana. We're facing the six oceans of sight, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. And we keep going out into that to find something that reinforces this sense of I and me. And we keep hoping that that will be our refuge. Oh, this doesn't work anymore. Maybe I got to do this. Oh, I better get a new partner because this is not working anymore. I better get a new job. I better, just on and on and on endlessly. Like Joseph Goldstein describes samsara as empty phenomena rolling on. And we just keep chasing all those empty phenomena, hoping we'll get one that, this one says nirvana. Well, we won't find it in that. We have to, in both Mahayana and in Theravada, we have the constant advice from all the teachers, turn the light around, turn the light inward, turn the light back on itself. And then we start to realize at some point, there is something, you label it consciousness, then you're going to have people say, well, consciousness is not constant. Which is true if we're talking about eye consciousness, ear consciousness. Those consciousnesses arise and pass, and we go to another one, But what is it that knows all of that? And we start backing into this, there's this indefinable something that knows. We don't have to define it. We don't have to name it. We certainly don't have to reify it and personalize it. As soon as we do that, it's no longer consciousness, it's another object of consciousness. So we're stuck again, where it's like, now I'm going to worship this. So a lot of the practices, like in the Thai forest tradition, and certainly, my early Zen practice was Zen Master Basui's inquiry. Who is it? What is it that sees? What is it? And that just keeps stripping everything away. Every time you think you've got something, that's not it. And the practice itself just keeps pushing you back and back and back and back and back and back. And then Zen Master Basui takes no prisoners. He says, be as before the birth of both your mother and father, separate from all phenomena, separate from all phenomena, which is completely contrary to a lot of people's idea of, everything is one. Let's just become one with everything. Well, if everything is anicca, dukkha, anatta, how does that help your cause? To become one with a much bigger anicca, dukkha, anatta. So, and not only is it okay not to know, it's essential. It's essential. As somebody, and I'm not talking about being ignorant, I'm talking about adopting a not know mind, not knowing mind, not certain mind. Because it's the certain mind that starts labeling and reifying things. And now you've got nama rupa, you've got the entire world of name and form, and you can't even move through the world of name and form and experience awe and joy and mystery because you've got it all labeled. We don't see things as they are. We see things as our mind has constructed them. It's just why I suggest taking up other signs like silence, stillness, ease. Become familiar with those signs, being okay with them, not being frightened by them, finding the ease that gets associated with them. And then that starts to open other doors. And then we can relax more. Many years ago, I used the phrase, comes from Christian mysticism, I think. The peace that surpasses understanding. And someone said, I don't understand that. Can you explain it more? And I said, well, then it wouldn't be the peace that surpasses understanding, would it? So anyway, anybody else? I'll probably be saying a little more about that next week, because next week, I promise, I'm not going to do any trauma stuff. I'm going to, my plan is for next week is maybe just take a few quotes and experiences that bridge between Mahayana and Theravada, hopefully. Claudia, did you have a question? Oh, which is the word in Sanskrit for the deathless? I don't know that there is. I would have to look it up. Actually, I'm not even sure if I know what it is in Pali. So, yeah, I'd have to look either one up, actually. So, yeah.
Is the deathless not the same as nirvana or nibbana?
Yeah, it is. But then there's also what often gets referred to as the deathless element. So we can say that nibbana, although it's not a place, because it's outside of space and time, Analayo Bhikkhu says the thing about nirvana is it is so other. It is so other than any of our ordinary experience. It is so other than anything that can be said about it that it defies description. But the deathless element is like, you could take up a very simple practice. Everything is changing, except what? And just keep looking for that, except what? What is it? Or leave it as an open question. Is there anything that's not changing? And investigate that. The way Zen Master Vasui put it was, when you finally discover that there's no me sense in the body that is a reality, then you realize that this very mind is the birthplace of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This very mind. Yes, we're getting close to our time, but Chaya, I think.
Hi, what a wonderful talk and discussion. You early in your talk, you mentioned sort of a connection between the fear of death and shame, and I just found that really interesting. And because I think any human being struggles with shame in some form at some point, and I just wondered if you could elaborate on that at all. We have so little time, but what can you say in the time we have?
Well, yeah, I mean, some, well, just in relation to tying it back to last week around trauma, there are some levels of shame that are so profound that they are very close. They bring up, it's very close to death anxiety, because, say a young child at a critical stage of development being shamed, it's like the authority figure or the parent or whoever reaching right into the narcissistic wound that's already there, ripping it out and dosing it in vinegar or something so that it's just totally unbearable. And then you have an actual experience, and I know this from experience, you have an actual experience of the mind fleeing its own subjectivity. It's like the body goes cold, the mind is off somewhere, just as if you're being beaten or raped, or somebody's got a gun to your head. You're over here, your consciousness is over here, it's fled the body, and the body's freezing. Shame can be just as powerful as that. Now, having said that, there is another aspect to shame, which is moral shame, which is actually a good thing. It's called hiri. Hiri is the Pali word, and hiri, however it's pronounced, is one of the guardians of the world. It's like a moral center, a moral compass. And the heart knows when it is actually creating suffering for itself and for others. Despite my cancer and my medications, which usually drain me and create a lot of brain fog and stuff, I do have some brain fog today, but it's not due to that. I got about 2 hours sleep last night. I think what's happened is I picked up on Dhammadeepa's samadhi energy, which happens to me on retreats a lot, despite my physical condition. After a couple of days of retreats, sleep is almost out of the question. And that happened to me last night. So I'm operating on not much sleep and my usual medications. So sometimes, my apologies for my brain kind of going in and out today, but that goes with the territory. So I'll just close with a kind of return of merit. May the merit field created here today extend in all directions. May it inspire all beings to cultivate the causes and conditions for happiness and peace, and to abandon the causes and conditions that create suffering and distress. May all beings be free of suffering. May all beings be at ease. May all beings receive the blessings of my life. Thank you, folks. I promise no trauma talk next week. Okay. Bye-bye.